The following program was produced by an independent community producer. The opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of the QATV staff or board of directors. QATV, in compliance with FCC regulations, is prohibited from exercising control over the content of independent, member-produced public access programming.
Hello and welcome to the show. Good evening. I'm Isha.
And I'm Sophie.
As usual, we try to bring you interesting topics. And today we have Mr. Bob Linscott from the LGBT Aging Process, Elder
Project.
Program.
Project.
Elder Project. All right. And we have Norma Fitzgerald. As you know, Norma has been with us for the last two shows, and she has invited Mr. Bob Linscott. And Mr. Bob Linscott has a lot to talk to you as well as to us and educate all of us. So, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure.
Yes, and thank you for coming.
Mm-hmm.
The audience doesn't know that there's a small
Snowstorm outside.
snowstorm going on while we're meeting here, so we really appreciate your
Sure,
being here.
sure, not a problem.
But then we faced a lot of obstacles in the
Yeah.
past, right?
Yeah.
So I thought maybe we could just talk a little bit about how we got connected and what's been going on since. So I have mentioned in the past that I retired in September from the Sharon Council on Aging as the director, and we had a program that we started up with you. So maybe you could just say a little bit, first of all, about the LGBT Aging Project
Sure.
and Fenway Health in general.
Sure. So the LGBT Aging Project is a organization that it's a program of the Fenway Institute at Fenway Health in Massachusetts, in Boston, and our focus is to bring cultural competency training to mainstream elder service networks and organizations to make them more aware and to make them more inclusive and of LGBT, the needs of LGBT older adults. We, instead of creating a whole new service delivery model for LGBT older adults, we just want to, we in Massachusetts, we have such a great elder service network that, you know, with the aging service access points, the councils on aging, the senior centers, it's a fantastic network. So we want to be able to make sure that they are able to do their best and to meet the needs of all people in their communities. And LGBT is one population that has just traditionally been overlooked and underserved. And the reason being, one of the main reasons being, is that this is a population, if you pause and think about what the world was like, 40, 50 years ago, when these folks were coming of age in the 50s and 60s, it was not okay. It was actually not only just not okay, it was against the law in all 50 states if people were gay. So they could lose their jobs, they could lose their housing. If they had children, they could lose the custody of their children. So this population just knew fly under the radar screen, don't draw attention to themselves, not to get in any trouble. And so they went about their lives and doing just that. And some were able to form some kind of close social networks. Many were even afraid of guilty by association, so they weren't even doing that. They were just kind of going about their lives. This population is also, sadly, very estranged from their families. And I think if you think about, in terms of, culturally, like family plays such a critical role in so many cultures, and to not have that, and that came about because families just didn't know how to do. There was no such thing as PFLAG, Parents and Friends of Lesbian and Gays Everywhere. That there was no such thing. There were no support systems. So there's a lot of shame in there. People found out they had gay children or whatever. So the divide just got further and further. So they're not out to people, friends. They're not out to coworkers. They don't have family. They're just kind of flying under the radar screen. And they go about their lives, and many did the best they could, but it's when they get to be elders and they need the support. They become frail, and they need support. They need elder services, but they're afraid again, even though the world is changing, even though now, gay marriage is the law of the land in all 50 states, they're waiting for that shoe to drop. They're afraid that they are in their frail state that they will be discriminated on again. So our work is to work with all of these aging service access points, the elder service providers, the councils on aging, like Norma's, and to help them to be not only just to be more culturally competent to understand what it's like to be an older LGBT person, but also beyond that training to help do outreach, to make folks know that their senior center or their agency is welcoming, that they get it, that they're ready to serve them. So when Norma approached us, oh my goodness, when you initially approached us, that was quite a few years ago, and she wanted to start this whole process going, which was great. You were one of the first senior centers to do that. So that's been fantastic to see the growth of what's been going on in Sharon.
And we've been able to take it further than that, because after we got into providing this program, we provide a lunch program
Right.
and socialization program once a month at the Sharon Council on Aging, and although I'm not there, it's still going on.
Right.
In addition to that, we offer some tea dances there a couple
Yeah.
of times a year, which brings in even more people. But we've also been able to take the show on the road and educate other Council on Aging staff from around the state,
Right.
and from other nearby states as well.
I think that what Norma and her staff did, or former staff, now that you're not there, it's just, I can't believe you're not
Well,
there
they're there,
anymore.
but I'm not.
They're there, is so important, because this process started, and the Aging Project started its work around 2001, so we've been doing this for 15 years. So it would make sense, and there were other meal sites that were in the greater Boston area. But people think, well, naturally, because a lot of LGBT folks flock to the cities, safer in number, urban environments, whatever. So it makes sense you would have these meal programs and things like that, but not in the rural areas. So Norma's was the first to do that, and it was kind of this trial, like, okay, if we build it, will they come? Will folks actually come to this thing? But I want to back up a little bit, and just to explain kind of what is happening here is that this is a perfect example of once that cultural competency training is done that the Aging Project provides, then folks, if they did that, and we gave them a lovely certificate saying you've now completed this, and they would stand there waiting for LGBT seniors to come. That wouldn't happen because of that fear that I told you about earlier. So they then begin to need to do some outreach, to look for ways to reach out to the community and say, come on, we've got some programs. So we often do a community conversation, which we did at the Senior Center. We did a community conversation on issues of LGBT aging in the Sharon area. And we invited faith leaders, we invited community members, elected officials, all these folks to come together and discuss this, and then ask the LGBT older adults that were there, what programs would you like? If you were to come to this senior center, what would you want to see? And would you want to have some kind of a regular support group or something going on here? And typically a lot of folks feel a little, it's a very, there has been a very heterosexual space for a long time. So people are a little afraid for gay folks to start coming in. So what has happened is that the fear for folks, LGBT folks, to walk into a regular community like congregate meal, because this is the generation, their peers are the ones that grew up their whole lives thinking that homosexuality was wrong, it's immoral. So some of those folks still hold on to that belief, and even if they don't, the LGBT seniors are afraid that they do, so they're not going to want to go in. So then we have these LGBT-friendly meal programs, specific programs that are open to everyone but are very clearly billed as LGBT-friendly, which is what they did there. So when we offered that as one of the opportunities, people said, yes, that gets them in the door. And what's great is that you can see folks coming into the program there at the Senior Center, at the Adult Center, and then they start slowly trying out other classes that are going on there. And then, because you don't want to do this separate but equal, like here's the Sharon Adult Center, the typical crew, and they've got their programs, and then here's the LGBT programs. You don't want that at all. You want really integrated. You want folks, but they've got to start and feel that sense of safety. They start in a small group like this and begin to emerge out. And then it's great when other people from outside, want to start asking, what's going on in there? And they want to come in and sit and enjoy. And so it's great to see that. Yeah.
Exactly. and what it's done individually for some people. When we had the community conversation, I remember that one of our former staff members, who was an elder himself, talked about a grandchild, I think, who was gay, who lived in another state, and he was very concerned about the relationship and even having a relationship. And when he went to visit, he was so awkward, felt so awkward. So the fact was that he could finally talk about it.
Yeah.
And talking about it and seeing, I think, the role models that he saw. He saw colleagues and staff who were accepting, and a community that became welcoming and comfortable would ultimately make a difference for him and this person in his life.
Right,
and I
right.
think for others as well. We had other people come forward also, somebody whose adult child was having severe emotional problems, but now they were able to come and talk to our social workers, Susan Ettinger, about the very critical issues that were going on with their child. So they just knew that this was a place
Safe
that they could
place.
trust,
Yeah,
a safe
yeah.
place. Yeah.
Like you were saying, Bob, at the beginning, like people, the older people were kind of lonely, I guess.
Yeah.
They didn't have anybody to talk to because
Right.
it was frowned upon.
Right.
So does this help them then, like come into and make friends
Yeah.
and become friendly?
Yeah, absolutely. It gets folks in there, and I'll never forget, because it's hard for people that did not grow up in the LGBT community to understand this isolation that has just set in. And I'll never forget at that community conversation that we did the very first time, is we went around and asked people to introduce themselves, and this woman said, she said, "I'm so glad that I'm here. I've been waiting for this. I've lived in Sharon all my life." And she said, "There's never been any other LGBT folks here." And then a woman said, "I live in Sharon." They were a couple blocks away
Right.
from each other, and they don't even realize.
Right.
So
Right.
now they're coming together. And I also remember that wonderful older woman that came towards the end of her life, and she'd come out, and somehow Jane, the nutrition director, crossed paths with her and got her to come to this. Big step for her to come. And that first day she was there, she wasn't eating anything, and Jane was like, "Is everything okay?" And she said, "I'm just so full." And Jane said, "Yeah, you didn't eat anything." She said, "I'm just so full of joy." She said, "I feel like I'm finally part of a community."
Right.
And for people to experience something like that, especially if they've had this lifetime of discrimination or isolation, to be able to, at least in their older years, to be able to enjoy a social network and to be able to connect with each other, I think that's so important.
Yeah.
To me, I think it's priceless.
Yeah.
But what other communities other than Sharon are you doing something in Quincy? Because we have a huge community right here in Quincy.
Yeah. So our work that we do, as I said, we are associated with the Fenway Health and the Fenway Institute. So we are really, even though we're located in Boston, our mandate is the whole state. So we have got programs that we've started, we've done trainings all from Western Mass to the North Shore to the South Shore. I'm doing we also do lead healthy education, healthy aging programs. I've just been doing one not too far down here in Braintree. So really, anywhere. And I think that where we're at right now is we're looking specifically at, here's the larger LGBT aging community, but we're looking at what are the subsets. If these folks are just beginning to emerge, where are the LGBT older adults of color who are there? What are the African American, the Asian American, the Hispanic, Latino? Those folks are even more hidden and even more cut off and isolated. So in the past few years, we started a whole new initiative in the first year just looking at African American LGBT older adults and really bringing that up and getting these folks together and just watching these folks come together and be part of a community for the first time. A lot of folks feel like they have to pick their community, and it's like pick one but not, so that's either pick we saw this really first within the Black community. They could either choose like, okay, I'm going to immerse myself in the Black community, or I'm going to immerse myself in the gay community, but not both. If people were really feeling like they couldn't do both, and then here were a lot of opportunities there were certainly Black LGBT social groups, but they were young. So they couldn't even hold that third part of their self. It's like it's either Black, gay, or aging, older. So we worked to really create that space where people could be fully with their authentic selves of being someone of color, of being LGBT, and to be an older adult. We live in a world that is very youth oriented, and so there's so many things out there. And when people finally find a group and they think, oh, this is so exciting, and they get there and they look and everyone is 24 to 34, and they're like, well, they're not going to get me, so they don't go back. So we're so interested in looking at, so that group with the LGBT elders of color, we're beginning to slowly expand and look at the Hispanic, Latino, Latina, and then the next one is looking at Asian, older LGBT folks who are Asian. And I think it's harder because there's a lot of cultural issues. Especially in the Asian communities, there's a lot of invisibility there. So I think that we're going to have a harder time finding older folks.
And how would you get the word out about programs that exist for anybody, actually?
Yeah.
I mean, I know what we did. We did our newsletter and so
Right.
forth, and we delivered it by mail, so
Right.
people got it. And that's what elders,
Yeah.
not anybody like really younger. But
Right. We do the best just to try and get out there. When we start in a new area, we really go through the community papers, because everyone, even though people may not be reading LGBT papers, but the newspapers, because those are at the bars, and those are only open at night, and they're not going to go to the bars and not drive at night. So often, but everyone's reading the community papers. You get it at the grocery store. So they're getting those are the ones that are delivered to the house. We've just found recently, and believe it or not, this is reaching older, is things like Meetup online. Find more people through Meetup, which is great. But I think that when we start working with additional populations, additional social, racial, and cultural groups, it is really important to find kind of those either gatekeepers or other people who are already connected there. Then they can help us introduce and get the word out. So I think it's helpful to find some other larger, for example, Hispanic groups, and then when you start to get and connect with those, then you find there are LGBT folks in there, and how can you find some of the older LGBT folks?
Well, I know that MCOA,
Right.
there's an organization called Massachusetts Councils on Aging, is in contact with all of the COAs, the Councils on
Yeah.
Aging, and almost every one of them puts out a newsletter.
Yeah.
So information can go out, and I know that the Aging Project is working closely with
Yeah.
Dave Stevens, the
Right.
executive director at MCOA, and other people on all kinds of diversity projects.
So they're doing a whole new thing that we've been involved with. It's so exciting. So they looked, Dave and his crew looked and realized that a lot of the folks at the senior center, they were going to the typical senior centers in every community. What do you have, 351?
350 communities,
Yeah.
351, yeah.
Yeah, and the folks that were using, nothing against older white heterosexual women, but that was the majority of folks that were going to a lot of these senior centers.
Mm-hmm.
And we're realizing this doesn't reflect the whole population. Why is it just one group is going there? So David Stevens and his staff really looked at, okay, let's begin to look at this, and with the help of Executive Office of Elder Affairs, to begin to look at this program that makes senior centers, every one of them, a welcoming place for all. So it was great. They asked us to write the module, the training, to make to help every senior center become more LGBT friendly. And a lot of times people say, well, why LGBT? Why do you start with LGBT? And I think that it's a great starting point, because if you can learn what it's like with one particular community, and you can learn how to do outreach and find people, especially find people that are afraid to be found, that they don't want to draw attention. So we often say this is a very elusive population. If you can get out there and find them and let them know that your agency, senior center, or COA is welcoming and is excited to have them, then it's going to be that much easier when the other group, when you're trying to reach an immigrant population or another population, or population that English is not the first, if you kind of learn all of the strategies translate. So if you do it here with LGBT, then you can apply the same thing to all these other groups.
Do you find that it's easier, maybe because women talk a lot and amongst themselves, to get together than men do, like
Yeah.
in the LGBT community?
You know, it's. Do you mean like are the going into senior centers? Is that why
Yes.
there's more? Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that for some reason people are just more. Maybe it's more women that are. You probably could speak more to this. Are they there's more programming for women. I don't know. What would you say?
Well, there has been more program for women. Certainly, I think most councils on aging and senior centers now are trying to start men's groups.
Yeah.
But that doesn't always answer the question of where does a person of color or an LGBT person feel like they can fit in. I mean, we had a huge men's club that brought in people from many, many communities. We had like 300 members. There's probably somebody in there who's gay, at least one person.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
you know, I'll be darned if anybody's ever talked about it or if there's even been a speaker. But they do know what we're doing
Yeah.
in the center, so people can feel that they can come in and talk with the staff and maybe come to some other things
Right.
if they want to. But I was going to say that there's also, I think, a history of women tending to socialize more, that many men had, well, maybe more the typical family person, the dad, was busy at work in older generations, and didn't have a chance to really develop the kinds of friendships that you really need when you retire. I'm not sure. You could probably speak to the LGBTQ community and whether you noticed any differences. I don't.
You know, well, the thing that pops to my mind is that Norma's Adult Center participated in a research study that we did a while back, and it was fascinating. At some point, I would love to come by again and do it, because we could fill up a whole show on the results of that. But what we did, which has never been done before, but because Massachusetts is leading the way in terms of these LGBT-friendly meal programs, there's maybe there's like 4 or 5 of them in the whole country. We helped start the one in Chicago, one in Texas, a couple other ones. Massachusetts, we have 15 of them, so
Pretty good.
I think we're a little greedy, but we keep these things going. But several years ago, at the time when there was just 6 of them, that felt like a lot, that we were excited about that. So we decided to do this study. So there's a group of people that are involved in this interest in this area, that are researchers from a lot of the schools in the area and a lot of folks in the aging field, created an organization, a research division called Milano, which is the Massachusetts LGBT Needs Assessment Coalition. And we wanted to see the experience of folks at these congregate meal programs. So we took the 6 LGBT programs and we did a survey and asked all these folks questions. And we used the same questions for every LGBT site. We asked one for a mainstream a meal site in that same area, and really looked at the results. And you could see what was very interesting is that the mainstream ones were, it was majority women coming to all of those, very few men, and the few men that were there were often spouses that got dragged along. The LGBT ones it was like 50-50. It was really incredible. But there was a lot of data in there that was fascinating, in that we asked questions about, who do you call in case of emergency? Where do you spend Thanksgiving? Asking someone where you spend Thanksgiving is a very revealing question. So a lot of the folks at the mainstream that are heterosexual would be with their their children, and LGBT folks, they are either by themselves or with friends. And when we looked at the data, every time, and for example, who would you call for emergency? The older adults at the mainstream site say, my children, I call my children for something if something's going wrong. Well, when LGBT folks who don't have children, they reach out. So every time where everything was children over here, it would be friends. So the role of friends plays a really critical role. So it was really interesting looking at that, at the similarities of the data that came through there.
I want to ask you about some program you were telling me about earlier, which is this buddy program that really relates to what you're saying.
Well, and it's funny, without having our first snow this year, but just thinking about last year's winter was just like, I don't even want to...
No, don't go. Don't go there.
But it was bad enough for folks like us that don't have a problem shoveling or getting out there and navigating we had no sidewalks, no sidewalks for months. But it was incredibly isolating. Even if you felt like you had the ability to get out, for the folks that are frail and elderly, they were just shut in for that whole, what was it, mid-January to like almost
7
April.
months.
Yeah, I know. It was awful.
It's really bad. So, so I think that got us thinking, because it was really difficult for a lot of our older folks. And then, you know, I would say, to be in all honesty, the other thing that really caught my attention is that New York Times article that came out, over a month ago. Did you read that? It was called The Lonely Death of George Bell.
Oh, no.
Oh, very sad, about someone who died alone and was not connected to anyone. I just thought of these things, and I thought of some of the folks we work with, and I thought of the statistics that they are not partnered or married, they don't have children, they're living by themselves, and they're aging by themselves. That, oh God, we've got to do something. So we just started today, was the first meeting of the pilot group, and so we've got a group of 6 folks, and this happened to be a group of all men that do the first one, and we'll try it with other ones. But so every week they have a chart, and they would be like, if it was the 4 of us here, you'd call me one week, and then that same week I would call you. So everyone is getting a phone call and making a phone call. So you're
Fantastic.
caregiving and care receiving at the same time. And it's just a basic check-in call, but then that shifts if someone is not feeling well or whatever, then that shifts, so they may check in, may several phone calls, you know, and just see how they're doing. And then if you make a phone call and someone's not there and they don't call you back within 48 hours, then we launch a wellness check with the police and have them come check. So these folks now have a system where they are part of something, and then someone, they're connected to something larger than themselves. So I think it's great. I'm really hopeful this will work, because it just would be a nice companion piece, especially as we go across and start these meal programs. Like if we were to do one here in Quincy, which I would love to do, folks come into a senior center, wherever it's at, and when they're there, you've got them, and you can see how they're doing, and talk with them and engage them. But if the next week they don't come back again, how do you know what's going on?
That's right.
How do you know what's happening in their lives? But if they can, we don't have the resources to be checking with everybody, but if they can do that themselves, and if there's a problem, then they call the Circle Coordinator, which is one of our staff members. So.
I love the program for so many reasons, and one of which is not only do you get to check on people, but you also give each person has a turn in being helpful to somebody else.
Right.
So it gives them a role.
Right.
It gives them some sense of
responsibility,
and that they mean something to somebody else.
Exactly.
Really,
yeah. We asked them today at the end, we said at the end of this whole introductory session, what's the worst case scenario? And people are, what are your fears about this? And they're like, well, what will I say each time? And so we had to kind of coach them on, kind of things. And then we said at the very last thing, what's the best part about this? And they said, knowing that people care about me.
Oh,
and I just think,
wow.
Yeah.
I know,
Yes.
it touches your heart.
Yeah.
It really
Yes,
does.
yes.
Yeah.
And Quincy has a huge population, and even our elder service has, I think, 20,000, as we heard
Wow.
last time. Yes, so that would be wonderful.
And you've got to think about it. There's 20,000, then there's got, the number of
sure.
potentially
People.
LGBT folks. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is there a
So-
percentage? Sort of?
No one
I
can
know
ever
this-
tell, because there's rarely is that ever asked of people, and even when it is asked, people, especially of the older folks, are afraid to put it down on any particular paper. But anywhere from like 4 to 10%.
Yeah.
So
I was going to say 6 or somewhere I read.
Yeah.
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 So what's the term of the age? I mean, are you referring to an age group from 40, from 50, until, what
42 is a senior. No, I'm kidding.
Do you have your bus pass?
It's a funny question. And once they turn 60, they're eligible for services. But if a 60-year-old person walks into one of our meal programs, we think you must be here to volunteer, because you sure don't look like a senior.
True.
So our whole concept of aging is changing rapidly.
Good.
So I feel like the folks that we really are paying close attention to, it's not till they really hit their 70s or whatever, but they come onto the radar screen 65-ish or whatever in there. And a lot of times people fall into it and I think that you can correct me about this, and I think this is very similar in a straight community, but there's a gap that people fall into in that that when you're younger and you're socializing and your 20s and your 30s or whatever, like everything's great, and then all of a sudden you kind of cross into your 40s and like, okay, I'm not, and then you get into like 50 something, you're a little too old to go back to this group, but you're too young to go to this group, and so you're in this black hole. So what do you do? So I think that a lot of our focus is trying to get that middle group there, engaged, educated, connected, so that they begin patterns of healthy aging, because you cannot enter your older years, your senior years, without having a strong social network. You've got to have that. Whether you're gay or straight, you've got to have a strong social network. You've got to be connected to either a friends network, your family of origin.
Yes.
You know, you've got to have something
Support
there
system.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Yeah, I wanted to mention something that I had just come across on Facebook since I retired, spending a little too much time on my computer. But there is a Quincy Pride group. Did you see that?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so, seniors who are using the computer, many of them are using Facebook, may come across that. And it is certainly just through the general Quincy site, if information went out through that as well as through this site, et cetera, people might be able to get more information about resources and programs.
I think that one of the best things when you start this work is to immediately start thinking about this as an intergenerational approach.
Correct.
Because the younger folks, the only way that they're going to learn about their sense of history is from older folks who've been there. And then there's such a great exchange of information. We've done a lot at some of these meal programs, which you have now been doing too. It's just great to watch that unfold, to see the exchange of ideas and questions, and it's fantastic. Because so many folks feel like it's very sad, I think, in this country, because everyone's in their silos. Here's all the college-age folks, and here's the 20-something and 30-something, and here's the seniors.
It's lonely.
And yeah, you don't have this opportunity. And so many American folks, the only older folks they know are their grandparents and maybe the little old lady across the street. But when you can create opportunities for them to have dialogue together and exchange, it's fantastic. And when you can find something where they can work together, especially like technology. These kids are popping out of the womb and they're texting already. I know, they just know so much because there's toys that they're learning from a very early age, and older adults are challenged. Every time there's a new upgrade on software or whatever, I'm like, oh my God, let's start over again.
That's true. How long are you in this field, and what made you join this field? Was it opportunity?
That's a great question. Yeah. I've been in this for 10 years now, but so I kind of came in through it a different way. Was initially I was doing my my master's degree in comparative world religions, and so I was studying a lot of different world religions, and one of the programs that there was not a lot of coursework on was Native American religions. So after I graduated, I went out and was living with the Navajo people for a couple of years, and to learn as much as I could about that culture. And unbelievable experience, which I never really thought about that before until I got there, was like, you're living in a matrilineal society, matriarchal society, where the women are on the top, and so the older women are the most important and most respected there. I was like, that is just the opposite of America, when you want to get something done in Navajo Nation, you find the oldest woman. Not here. And so I think for me, listening to my students there and always talking about, they would just go on and on about the wisdom that their grandparents, the other elders, and they just had such a reverence and such a respect. So I thought, oh my God, we're missing the boat here. So that was inside. So that was definitely a part of me. When I left there and went on to go teaching at the high school level, I ended up getting asked very early on to run a Gay Straight Alliance. And I had never had experience of that, so I was like, okay, here we go. And then as I was doing that work, and I think it was the experience of living with the Navajo people, I kept thinking about elders, and I thought, there's LGBT history is not written in history books, at least not very much. So the only way that LGBT kids in my GSA were going to learn about this was to connect it with LGBT elders, and where there were no opportunities to do that intergenerationally. So I kept looking for elders. I'm like, where do I find LGBT elders? And that's right about the time the Aging Project had just started. And so I kept connecting with them. Can you send me some more elders, because I'm doing this intergenerational program? And then pretty soon they were like, why don't you come work for us? So that's how,
Oh,
so
we're glad you did.
Yeah.
And so how is this funded, the work you're doing? Is
through
it
the state,
Okay.
primarily through the state, out of the Executive Office of Elder
Excellent.
Affairs. So we're working right now, it is voluntary. So if someone wants to go and do the training, that we didn't come knocking on the door and saying you need to do this training here. Norma approached us and said, "Wait, I want to do this." She wanted to do this and bring this to the Sharon Adult Center. But we're really hoping that that this becomes. We've got a bill pending that we want to see that get passed, so that's mandated. That LGBT the cultural competency is part of the larger cultural competency expectations. So that, because I think the places where we really want to go are the places that don't want to do the training, because if they think, oh, we don't need it, or we treat everyone the same, or they have issues around it, you know that there's people in those communities that are really suffering because they can't participate in programs there.
I know when I did a workshop with Lisa Krinsky, who's the director of the LGBT project, and we did it at the Mass Councils on Aging annual meeting. You know, we had people who wanted to just start programs.
Yeah.
And so I kind of talked about our experience, and Lisa talked about how important it is to have the training, because you can't just hang up your little sticker, your little rainbow sticker, and welcome people in. We went through a whole series of the community conversation and a lot of just private workshops with staff and volunteers and our board. And we changed our mission statement, and we put that out on every newsletter that goes out. So every month, our mission statement about welcoming all. We also had a series of articles, I think, in the local paper.
Yes, yeah, that's
and
really
we
important.
talked about the fact that we felt welcoming all was so important, and one of the groups we were starting with was the LGBTQ group, but we had already welcomed in the past. We had a lot of Russian elders in Sharon. We were getting a lot of Chinese and Indian elders. We had some other programs previously, so it wasn't alien, but it also hadn't been talked about the same way. So we really tried to prepare the community and prepare our board members and our staff and our volunteers and everybody else. So when people would walk in there, they would be welcome.
Right. You know, it's interesting. We just had an experience which I think is very, you look at this at the micro level and you can pull back and see at the larger macro level, but where we have these LGBT-friendly meal programs, it's so unique. Some are in churches, some are in senior centers, some are in adult centers, some are in assisted living facilities, rest homes. There was one that we had where it is done in a rest home, and it becomes very visible. People all see, so people it creates a need to have that kind of communication and discussion, a little bit of education with the residents there, like who's this group that's coming in, so they can learn about that. Well, as that went on, one of the residents finally, after being her entire life in the closet, said to the staff there that I would like to go to that because I am a lesbian too. So she came, and that just helped her to feel so proud of who she was and to really celebrate this part of herself. And so the excitement kept building and building, and then she decided that she wanted to come out to all the residents and let them know that she too was a lesbian, and so they allowed her to do that, which was great. Then they thought they profiled someone in their newsletter, and so she said, I want to tell my story. So she told her story. This was all exciting. She was very well embraced by folks, and then someone slid something under her door that was not very nice at all. And the staff there worked through there, because they have the cameras, security system, they knew who it was. So they brought them together and talked about this, and this is why this is so revealing. When all was said and done, the woman that did that kept saying, why do you get all the attention? Why is all this about you? So you can really, and it turned out she had an amazing story herself. So I think a lot of times when people see some of the resistance to some of they think, well, why are you focusing on LGBT? What about this population, this population? And so what Norma was doing was great, to say, this is where we're starting. Help us decide where we're going to go next. In that rest home, the next profile is going to be this other woman. And so I think that really helps us see the larger picture of how do you begin to get this into a community, because there is a little resistance to saying, oh, all this work on just LGBT. No, it's not just LGBT. This is kind of our entry point into a larger diversity dialogue.
But do you find, like, the older people, maybe because of the set mind from before?
Yes, absolutely,
How difficulty accepting those, though, is harder for them.
So where we're at right now is to really begin to look at not only the training that we're doing with staff at these agencies, but trying to figure out how are we going to do the kind of community education with residents and participants at senior centers to really help them understand these are your peers, these are your friends, these are the people you have grown up with. Help to see what it's like from their, walk a mile in their shoes.
Absolutely.
So I think we'll get there, and everybody has this bias, and a lot of times we just don't know where that came from. Well, these folks who are heterosexual seniors couldn't help. You can't get away from it. There were so many laws against homosexuality. It was, from churches and whatnot, everywhere. It was just put in their faces like, this is bad, this is wrong. So they've believed this all this year. So that's where this kind of unconscious bias comes from. We now need to kind of work through that and help them understand where that comes. When they get to see on a very human level, just this is a real person here, and this is what their life is like, then some of that just fades away, which is great.
I think
We
that's
need that with so many populations.
Yes, yeah.
absolutely.
So as you know, we've learned a lot in this show, and we wouldn't like anyone to die alone.
No.
And that touched my heart, really. The buddy program is fantastic for the community, and we thank you
Absolutely.
for,
Thank you for having us.
driving
This was
all the
fun.
way in the snow.
Yes.
Thank you so
And
much.
thank your doggy for letting you
Yes.
go. For
Yes,
Yes, sure,
absolutely.
sure.
And thank you, Norma. It was
You're so
wonderful to
welcome.
have you as usual.
Thank you.
I'm Isha.
And I'm Sophie.
See you next time.
Bye-bye.
That was great.